The clerk shouldn't have volunteered. Marcus Rivera looked like any other office worker at Camp Steel until he stepped into the ring with Master Sergeant Kane and everything changed. But when the quiet administrator with wire-rimmed glasses dismantled a 260-pound combat instructor in front of international observers, one question haunted everyone. If the man who processed supply requisitions could fight like an elite warrior, what was he hiding about his 10 years before the Army found him behind a desk? The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as soldiers hurried to their morning duties. Among them walked Marcus Rivera, a quiet man in his early 30s who worked in the administrative office. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he made his way through the bustling compound, carrying a stack of files under his arm. Most soldiers barely noticed him as he passed by, dismissing him as just another pencil pusher who spent his days buried in paperwork. Marcus had been working at Camp Steel for 4 years, handling supply requisitions, personnel files, and training schedules. He was the kind of person who blended into the background, never causing trouble, never drawing attention to himself. His colleagues in the office knew him as reliable and thorough, but beyond that, few people bothered to learn much about the man behind the desk. What they didn't know was that Marcus had a past that would have surprised them all. Before taking the clerical job, he had spent 10 years in special forces, serving in some of the most challenging missions overseas. He had earned numerous commendations for his service, including expert marksman badges and advanced hand-to-hand combat certifications. But a shoulder injury during his final deployment had forced him to step back from active duty, leading him to accept the quieter role in administration. Marcus preferred it this way. The constant adrenaline and life-or-death decisions of his previous career had taken their toll, and he found peace in the routine of office work. He enjoyed the predictability of filing reports, processing requests, and ensuring that paperwork flowed smoothly through the system. It gave him a sense of purpose without the weight of commanding troops or making split-second tactical decisions. On this particular Wednesday morning, Marcus settled into his desk as usual, adjusting his glasses and powering up his computer. The office was already buzzing with activity as his coworkers prepared for another busy day. Elena, the office manager, was on the phone with someone from headquarters, frantically taking notes about a last-minute inspection. David, who handled payroll, was muttering under his breath about missing timesheets. The familiar chaos of military bureaucracy surrounded Marcus like a comfortable blanket. As he opened his first file of the day, he could hear the distant sound of drill sergeants shouting commands at new recruits. The base was always training someone, whether it was fresh-faced soldiers just out of basic training or seasoned veterans learning new skills. Around mid-morning, General Brooks's aide appeared in the doorway of the administrative office. Lieutenant Rodriguez was known throughout the base as someone who only showed up when the general needed something done immediately. His presence caused a brief hush to fall over the office as everyone wondered what crisis had emerged. "The general needs to see everyone in conference room A in 12 minutes. Lieutenant Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone speaking on behalf of the commanding officer. "This is mandatory for all personnel currently in the building." Marcus saved his work and joined the small group of office workers making their way down the hall. Conference room A was typically used for briefings with visiting officials or important strategic meetings. The fact that they were being summoned there suggested something significant was happening. As they filed into the room, Marcus took a seat near the back, as was his habit. He preferred to observe from a distance, taking in information without drawing attention to himself. The room filled with about 25 people, including clerks, technicians, and junior officers who happened to be in the administrative building at the time. General Brooks entered the room with his characteristic commanding presence. At 57, he was a decorated veteran with gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess everyone in the room simultaneously. Behind him walked Master Sergeant Kane, a mountain of a man whose reputation preceded him throughout the base. Sergeant Kane was known for his intimidating physical presence and his ability to break down even the most confident soldiers during training exercises. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Brooks began, his voice filling the room with authority, "I have a unique situation that requires immediate attention. As you may know, we're hosting a delegation of international military observers next week. They'll be evaluating our training methods and overall readiness." The general paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Marcus adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly, curious about where this was heading. "One of the demonstrations they've specifically requested to see is our hand-to-hand combat training. Unfortunately, the officer who was scheduled to participate in the demonstration has been hospitalized with pneumonia. We need a volunteer to step in and face Master Sergeant Kane in a controlled combat exercise. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Everyone knew Sergeant Kane's reputation. He was not only massive and intimidating, but also held multiple black belts in various martial arts. At 6 feet 5 inches and weighing close to 260 pounds of solid muscle, he cut an imposing figure. The idea of facing him in combat, even in a controlled setting, was enough to make even experienced soldiers think twice. "I need someone who won't embarrass us in front of our international guests," the general continued, his eyes scanning the room. "This is a voluntary assignment, but I'm hoping someone here has the courage to step forward and represent our base with honor." "Sir?" Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "I volunteer." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Conversations erupted throughout the room as people turned to stare at the unassuming man who had just volunteered to face the base's most intimidating master sergeant. Some of his office colleagues looked at him as if he'd lost his mind, while others seemed impressed by his courage, misguided though they believed it to be. General Brooks raised an eyebrow, clearly not having expected the volunteer to come from the administrative staff. "Mr. Rivera, isn't it?" he said, consulting a roster on his clipboard. "You work in personnel administration?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, standing up slowly. "I handle supply requisitions and training schedules." Master Sergeant Kane's expression shifted from amusement to something approaching pity. He looked Marcus up and down, taking in the wire-rimmed glasses, the slight build, and the soft appearance of someone who spent his days behind a desk. To him, this was going to be less of a demonstration and more of an embarrassment. "Are you certain about this, Rivera?" the general asked, his voice mixing concern with professional obligation. "Sergeant Kane is quite experienced in hand-to-hand combat. This won't be like the basic self-defense training most civilian employees receive." Marcus nodded firmly. "I understand the risks, sir. I'm willing to participate." The truth was, Marcus understood the risks far better than anyone in that room could imagine. He'd faced opponents much more dangerous than Master Sergeant Kane in environments where the stakes were life and death rather than professional demonstration. But he couldn't explain that without revealing his past, something he preferred to keep private. Master Sergeant Kane stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the much smaller Clerk. "Son, I appreciate your courage, but I don't want to hurt you in front of all these people. Maybe you should reconsider." There was something almost gentle in the sergeant's tone, despite his intimidating appearance. Marcus could see that beneath the tough exterior, Kane was actually concerned about causing harm to what appeared to be an inexperienced civilian. "I appreciate your concern, Sergeant," Marcus replied calmly, "but I'm committed to helping the base make a good impression on our visitors." It's about the clerk who had volunteered to face Master Sergeant Kane. Some people were calling him brave, others were calling him foolish, and a few were questioning his mental stability. Master Sergeant Kane caught up with him in the hallway, his expression serious. "Listen, Rivera, I respect what you're trying to do, but I need you to understand something. When we get in that ring, I can't go easy on you. The international observers will be watching. And if this looks fake or staged, it'll reflect poorly on everyone." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the imposing sergeant. "I wouldn't want you to go easy on me, Sergeant. Give them the best demonstration you can." Kane studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of bravado or false confidence. What he saw instead was a quiet determination that reminded him of some of the best soldiers he'd trained over the years. There was something about this clerk that didn't quite fit the typical administrative profile. "All right then," Kane said finally. "I'll see you Friday at 1500. Use the next 4 days wisely." The news of Marcus Rivera's volunteer status spread through Camp Steel like wildfire. By Thursday morning, it seemed like everyone on the base had heard about the clerk who was going to face Master Sergeant Kane in combat. The reaction was mixed, ranging from admiration for his courage to genuine concern for his well-being. Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine, but it proved nearly impossible. Every time he walked through the corridors, conversations would stop and people would stare. Some soldiers nodded respectfully as he passed, while others whispered among themselves, shaking their heads at what they perceived as either remarkable bravery or stunning foolishness. In the administrative office, the atmosphere had become almost protective. Elena had taken it upon herself to research everything she could find about Kane's fighting record and training methods. What she discovered only increased her worry about Marcus's chances. "Did you know he holds black belts in 4 different martial arts?" she said during their coffee break, spreading printouts across the break room table. "And he's been the base's hand-to-hand combat instructor for 9 years. Marcus, This isn't just about being brave anymore. This is about not getting seriously injured. David joined the conversation, carrying his own stack of research materials. I talked to some guys from the training division. They say Kane has never lost a demonstration match. Not once. He's beaten soldiers who had years of combat experience. Marcus listened to their concerns while sipping his coffee, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had characterized him throughout his years in the office. What his friends didn't understand was that he had been using the past 3 days not just to mentally prepare, but to physically reconnect with skills he hadn't used in years. Each evening after work, Marcus had been visiting an old friend who lived off the base. Master Wu ran a small martial arts school in town, and he was one of the few people who knew about Marcus's special forces background. The two had become friends during Marcus's early recovery from his shoulder injury, when physical therapy had led him to explore alternative methods of maintaining his fitness and flexibility. "Your muscle memory is still there," Master Wu had told him during their first evening session. "The body remembers what the mind sometimes forgets, but you must trust yourself." Marcus had spent hours each night working through combat forms, stretching exercises, and mental preparation techniques. His shoulder, which had ended his active military career, was actually in better condition now than it had been in years. The desk work and regular physical therapy had allowed it to heal completely, though he'd been too comfortable in his civilian routine to fully realize it. The most challenging aspect wasn't physical preparation, but rather the mental shift required to access skills he'd deliberately suppressed. For 4 years, he'd trained himself to think like a clerk, to avoid confrontation, and to solve problems with paperwork rather than action. Now, he needed to remember how to think like a warrior again. On Friday morning, the day of the demonstration, Marcus arrived at work to find an unexpected visitor waiting at his desk. Colonel Hayes, the base's deputy commander, was sitting in his chair, reading through a personnel file that he recognized as his own. "Mr. Rivera," she said, looking up as he approached, "I think we need to have a conversation." Marcus set down his coffee and files, wondering if someone had uncovered his military background. Colonel Hayes had a reputation for thorough research and attention to detail that rivaled his own. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" The colonel stood up and gestured toward the conference room where this whole situation had begun. "Let's talk privately." Once they were seated with the door closed, Colonel Hayes opened his file and spread several documents across the table. Marcus could see his original enlistment papers, service records, and commendation certificates, documents he'd assumed were buried deep in the military bureaucracy. 10 years Special Forces, she said without preamble. Expert marksman, advanced hand-to-hand combat certification, multiple decorations for valor under fire, wounded in action, and honorably discharged. She looked up at him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Why didn't you mention any of this when you volunteered?" Marcus felt a mix of relief and apprehension. His secret was out, but he wasn't sure what the implications would be. "I prefer not to discuss my previous service, ma'am. I'm just trying to help the base with its demonstration." Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "Do you realize that half the base thinks you're committing suicide by facing Kane? The other half thinks you've had some kind of breakdown." "I understand their concern," Marcus replied, "but I believe I can handle the situation." "I'm sure you can," the colonel said with a slight smile. "The question is whether we should let everyone continue thinking you're just a brave clerk, or if we should prepare them for what they're actually going to see today." That afternoon, word began circulating through unofficial channels that there might be more to Marcus Rivera than met the eye. Someone had leaked information about his military background, though not the full details. The rumors ranged from wildly inaccurate to surprisingly close to the truth. Marcus found himself fielding questions from colleagues who had worked beside him for years without knowing anything about his past. The hardest part was explaining why he'd never mentioned his service record, especially to fellow veterans who worked on the base. "I needed to put that life behind me," he explained to a group of concerned friends during lunch. "The clerical work gave me peace and purpose without the weight of command decisions. I wasn't hiding from my past. I was just choosing not to live in it." Friday afternoon arrived with anticipation that had spread far beyond the administrative building. What had started as a routine presentation for international observers had transformed into the most anticipated event at Camp Steel in months. At 1500 hours, Marcus found himself in the demonstration area of the main training facility, face to face with Master Sergeant Kane in front of an audience that included not only the international observers, but what appeared to be half the base personnel. As General Brooks completed his introduction to the international delegation, Marcus felt the familiar calm that had always preceded his most challenging missions. His breathing slowed, his vision sharpened, and his mind cleared of everything except the immediate tactical situation. The transformation was complete. The quiet clerk had awakened the warrior within. What happened next would be remembered at Camp Steel for years to come. Marcus Rivera didn't just hold his own against Master Sergeant Kane, he systematically demonstrated combat skills that left everyone in stunned silence. The man they'd dismissed as a pencil pusher moved with the precision and confidence of elite military training. When the demonstration ended with Kane on the mat, looking up in shock and genuine respect, the facility erupted in thunderous applause. The international observers were taking detailed notes, clearly impressed by what they'd witnessed. As Marcus helped Kane to his feet and removed his glasses to wipe them clean, he caught sight of Elena and David in the crowd. Their faces showed a mixture of awe, confusion, and something that looked like pride. His quiet life at Camp Steel would never be the same, but for the first time in 4 years, Marcus Rivera felt like he was exactly where he belonged.